Hello, everybody, and welcome or welcome back to ASMR Spooks. I'm your host, Stephanie, and tonight we will be reading a collection of scary, spooky, creepy stories that I've gathered from Reddit. All of these stories are extremely unnerving. So sit back, relax, grab a snack, and prepare to be spooked. This camping trip turned into a genuine horror movie when I was visited in the dead of night by a group of rancid people. For context, I live in NT and wanted to get away from everyone, especially my insane family. I did some research on some large open areas and found out that the largest farmland in Australia was Anna Creek Station. Apparently, this land is bigger than all of Israel or something. I packed my stuff and drove the 400-kilometer trip in my 4x4 camping rig. Got out there and was feeling good, set up my gear, and was ready for my first meal. It was about 9 p.m. when I got tired and decided to go to bed. I sleep in the back of my rig as it's an SUV, an 100 Series Land Cruiser, and I feel much more comfortable here than if I was in a tent. At around 1 in the morning, I woke up, not sure why. As I was trying to fall asleep again, I started hearing heavy footsteps around my oot in the dirt. They were irregular footsteps. They would take 3 steps in one direction, then 3 steps towards my coop, slowly getting closer and closer. I was really regretting having the back windows cracked now. As the footsteps grew closer, they seemed to become more frequent, while somehow keeping the same rhythm. 3 steps left, 3 steps forward, 3 steps right, and so on. They got closer and closer, and now I was hearing the steps coming from both sides of my oot. I'm 100% sure that this was no animal. There's no animals out here that would walk like that. At this point, I was shitting bricks, and I didn't dare move or make any noise. Whoever was out there would know for sure there was someone in the vehicle. Who would leave a car out in the middle of nowhere 3 hours drive away from anything? At this point, they are right outside my car. My tinted windows were keeping me from being seen. I hear something scratching on the window right beside me. Sounds like metal on glass. I could barely see out my window, but if there was something there, I would have definitely seen a silhouette at least. Both sides of my window were now being scratched, as well as the back window. Now I know that there were at least 3 people outside trying to either get in or get me out. I was violently shaking from the terror and the adrenaline. I am usually a fighter when it comes to people messing with me, but something about these people made me get into a flight response. I tried to creep my way into the driver's seat, but as I moved my knee, it squished something that made a loud crinkle noise. The scratching stopped on a dime. Everything went completely silent for what felt like hours. Suddenly, the most blood-curdling screams were let out all around the car. There was like 7 or 8 of these things outside. Sounded like the scream of a mountain lion, which we don't have here, so it was clearly something else. The scratches and screams on the windows turned into banging. The whole car was swaying side to side as these things were hitting it. They were extremely strong, would probably tip the car if they had tried hard enough. I sprung into action and got in the driver's seat and turned on the car. In front of me, hunched over, was what looked like an older man, about 5'10", very pale, dirty, and wore no clothes. He did not have any weapons, but his fingernails were at least 12 centimeters, 5 inches, and very sharp. This was the only part about him that looked unnatural. 6 more of these people ran in front of the car, screaming their heads off, banging on the bonnet. They all looked different, except they were pale, overly long nails, and no clothes. I threw it in first and peeled off. They were sprinting behind me. The red glow from the taillights made them look devilish. I was reaching 40 kilometers and was barely losing them. I got about 20 kilometers down the rugged path, and they were no longer in sight. I stopped the ute to think up what the hell just happened. I was petrified, and the adrenaline was long gone. I broke down in tears. I felt safe enough, and I was about to head off when I heard a quiet, animalistic groan as well as metal on metal coming from the roof of my car. It was then when I realized I had left the sunroof open. I didn't dare look up. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents to the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school, and we're celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner, still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there, talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them, hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother, as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So David went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what Dave was taking so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly, and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me?" Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working, as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration, except for... "It's all right, I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. There's 5, right? I mean, there's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty, one for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about the one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. "Who started the fire?" I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light of the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide, and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders, trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now," someone else said. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow," Eric agreed. I tried to protest, but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one person tent with us, but we could squeeze 2 if we tried. That way, no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave, and Sally, like always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I felt like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of a clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the four outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in like a sort of U shape, so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed that there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all of our tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put on a brave face for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that one of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents that we had left out, and I saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it, his head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it, with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her head repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name after she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail. Dave and I shoulder to shoulder, while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my rib cage and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed to fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended, and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran into the car and started it up, accelerating out of the forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post now out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been silent the whole time. "What would you like to do before you die?" the driver asked me right after we started. What a strange question, I thought, looking at the glowing dashboard of his car. His phone was attached under the air vent and showed a small blue arrow moving along my route home. "What do you want to do before you die?" he insisted. I thought he was talking on the phone at first and looked in the rearview mirror only to see his huge brown eyes staring at me. He had a look of desperation on his face, although I could only see the pupils the size of a pinhead and small red veins penetrating the white. I tried to unlock my phone and ignore him. He was probably not all there or wanted to make conversation. Anyway, he would probably understand the message and leave me alone with these questions. Outside, the rain was falling on the streets. Gray puddles formed at the edge of the sidewalks, and the yellow lights were just fading. The apartment buildings had soft lights running up to the sky. The street was empty, and only our small car was speeding continuously between the dashed lines. "This is the last time I ask you. What would you like to do before you die?" The man turned the mirror towards me and then cleared his throat. I couldn't think of anything. No one has ever asked me that before. I looked out the window and at him in silence, just trying to think of something. Time seemed to slow down, and on the dashboard, the speed was increasing steadily and quickly up to 60, 70, 80, and suddenly we were driving through the city at 120 miles per hour. The man swerved between cars, and I held onto the seats, trying not to fall over when he made turns. In my panic, I tried to think of any possible answer, and then a text message appeared on my phone. "I saw Alexandra with her new boyfriend at the restaurant today. I'm here now. Do you want me to send a picture? The guy looks super rich." "I want to talk to my ex-girlfriend one last time," I shouted in his ears, and the car started to slow down. Large tears formed in his eyes, and then he wiped his nose with a handkerchief. "Why?" was his short answer. "Why?" Well, I started to tell him about her and how happy we were for 3 years until she cheated on me. I told him that it would be like a consolation for me. I wanted to know why she did it. She left without leaving a message or telling me anything. The man seemed to be moved by my story and even asked if I could show him some pictures of us. It still hurt to look at them, so I opened the gallery on the Once Upon a Time album and handed him my phone. That screen could poison me with just a few touches. It was something so intimate, but very liberating at the same time. I felt that he understood me. I wanted to share my pain with someone. Maybe that way it would be easier. The driver looked through the pictures, exclaiming here and there how beautiful we were together. What a wonderful family we would have had, or what a shame it ended. He seemed to be moved, and when he reached the last picture, I reached to take the phone back on the back seat. "What a pathetic wish for a last wish," he said, throwing my phone out the window. The shock that froze my blood was indescribable. I didn't know what to do without my phone. I didn't know any number other than emergency number, and I had never been in this situation. I looked ahead and could see the arrow passing my house and the driver pressing ride confirmed, and then he closed the app. "I'm afraid to die alone," he said, wiping his tears with a handkerchief. The car accelerated faster, and I could hear him revving it up to the red line. The engine roared, and the air conditioner cold seemed to cut through my face. I didn't know if it was real what was happening. The minutes seemed to have stopped, and the needle on the speedometer passed 140. I could feel the vibration of the wheels in every pothole. I looked towards the doors, towards the city. We were getting close to the exit. The cars were getting rarer, and I was praying to see a patrol car or anything. I still didn't believe him, but I slowly approached the door. His eyes were looking at the road so intently that sweat formed between the wrinkles on his forehead. I reached for the lever, and a silver handle caught my eye as the street light flew above the car like the last firefly on earth. I could already see the exit sign for the city. To jump or not to jump. I knew that if something happened, I should have never let the kidnapper take me to the second location. But what if I jumped and I died? What if he came back for me? But I hadn't even seen his face, only those strange eyes with pupils the size of a small bead. I was holding on to the door, resting my forearm on the plastic support, and it felt like I was in a tunnel. My ears were pounding from the speed, and my heart was beating to the rhythm of the train wheels on the tracks. To jump or not? Do I have the courage to do it, or do I die as this madman wants? One last look at the dashboard, 160 miles per hour. I won't make it, but maybe it slows down if I open the door. The car managed to slow down. A driver was turning left on the back road. Now is the time. My fingers were checking the grip to know for sure what I needed to pull. I only had one chance. It's now or never. 100, 90, 60, 50. I pull the handle and a metallic click sounds. The door doesn't open. I try 2, 3, 4 times. Nothing. Child protection locks. The driver looked at me and seemed even more nervous. His bushy eyebrows descended harder over his eyes, and it was as if darkness invaded his pupils. I have never seen such an evil man before. I felt that he was evil somehow. "I'm not a bad man, even if it seems so now. I'm just afraid of death," he said in a defeated tone, and I saw his eyebrows relax. "I understand you're young and you'd like to live. You were unlucky enough to be my last ride today. I've been asking people all day what they want to do before they die. Their answers were so pathetic. I'd like to skydive. I'd like to go to Dubai. I'd like to get married. Well, once you do that, what stops you from dying?" I was surprised by his monologue. I couldn't think of anything now to get him to stop the car, so I decided to listen to him. I was hoping it wouldn't be the last negotiation in my life, because I'm not good at negotiations at all. I'm not a persuasive man. I would even say that I'm a man with a boring life in the eyes of others. I work as a cashier 9 to 5, live in a studio apartment, and watch comedy movies. I never aspired to do anything more. I didn't value life. I thought it was something you were just born with. Some are born luckier, others sadder. I never thought I would become someone. I just wanted a simple, peaceful life without worries and stress, without getting involved with a job or a business or a college. A normal life where you get home after work, eat, watch a movie, and go to bed only to do it all over again the next day. I had all these things before I was a driver of this car. I had businesses, money, cars, a beautiful wife, anything a mortal could want. I was someone. Now, nobody even recognizes me on the street anymore. I was a famous boxer until I injured my shoulder and it ruined my whole career. My life left for someone else. I lost money at the casino and the moneylenders took the rest. I destroyed the cars to heal my anger and everything became a ruin. I have more deaths than my life is worth, he said in tears and began accelerating harder, wiping his eyes without looking at the road. I have chosen a place for us tonight, a bridgehead. It's far enough away that the ambulance won't make it in time if we miraculously survive. We still have about 15 minutes to go. I was speechless when I heard these words. 15 minutes to convince him that life is worth living? What to say to a man who has already had everything and it's too late to try again? He looked to be about 60 years old. It was like a deadly riddle. A correct answer would save 2 lives, and a wrong one would have condemned us to a painful suicide among the metal scraps of a contorted car. I never imagined that this is how I would die, and already I could feel the sofa fabric seats squeezing me in their eternally suffocating embrace. Suddenly, the car became smaller, and the nausea made me gag. There were no blocks outside, and the lights were the only witnesses to this tragedy. I couldn't die. I was only 29. I have a whole lifetime ahead. It couldn't end like this. I want to see another sunrise, I said, after thinking better. I'm sure you'd like to see one too. The last sunrise? Let's stop and see it together. I thought I could buy myself a few more hours because the sun wouldn't get up until about 8, and it was now almost 1 in the morning. The driver said, I've seen hundreds of sunrises and sunsets in my life. I saw the stars in the sky dancing in the night. Comets, galaxies, what absolute beauty. Too bad you're young, but I believe this is what is beyond death is much more beautiful. Someone is going to look for us through a telescope soon. One sentence would have made the difference between life and death, and at the end of the street, I could see the little lights floating above an arched bridge. I think the old man was generous with 15 minutes. If I strangled him behind the wheel, he would lose control, and that's where we'd end up. I was racking my brain for any ideas and realized I didn't want to die. The old man had a whole day to change his mind. He probably talked to a few dozen people, and nothing convinced him. And now I had to find something. Everything seemed to make sense, as if even a beetle on the grass would have made me value life. But for someone who has lost everything, it wouldn't have mattered. I could see him looking at me through the rearview mirror, and I felt him gently brake the car. Now I was no longer driving at who knows how many kilometers per hour. It was only about 50 to 60. It gave me time to think. If you are destined to die another day, you hurry fate, and we do not die. What happens? What will you do if you fail and you can't do it again? The driver said, That's why I'm going to make sure when we get to the bridge that I accelerate to the maximum. Well, what if you live by a miracle? Don't you think it's easier to take your life in another way? In a way where you're going to be 100% sure you're going to die beyond a shadow of a doubt? It seemed to work. I made him think, and the man actually stopped the car. I think I escaped. The wheels were turning in his head, and I felt the weight of an elephant was lifted off of my shoulders. The chairs that were going to be my cages now let me in them like the most comfortable armchair on earth. I was going to see a new day. Driver. You're right, said the old man, looking for something on the phone. We'd better jump in the lake. That was the moment when I thought of taking his life for the first time, but I didn't have the mental strength, and the old man began to speed off. Happy and laughing, now that I found a better alternative, I created my own hell. If I got into that lake, I would not get out alive. The car was speeding, and I could see he was changing his mind. You have no power to do this. You want to live, I was telling him from behind, trying to convince myself that it would work. We got to the dock and the car approached the water, and the man braked. What do you want to do before we die? He asked now in a whispered and muffled voice. He was looking for any reason to stop. The water is so calm and the waves move like the heartbeat of the earth. I looked at all the windows and the passenger door and decided to try one last time to save us. The car hummed quietly, and I could only imagine what would follow my answer. I want to end up like you. I want to box, live my life, be as happy as you once were, I said, and for the first time, a smile appeared on his face. Those were good times. Too bad they're gone. The man accelerated the car to the maximum, and I felt the front tilt towards the water, and then I fell into the lake. Black, cold water started flooding the car immediately, and the headlights went out. The darkness was so overwhelming that I didn't know where was up and where was down, and the water was around my ankles. The old man watched me without moving, like he was paralyzed. I wouldn't have guessed that a sinking car would take so long. I had time to think about everything, how ridiculous that it was that I wanted to call my ex as my last wish. Now I would have wished for anything else. The water was up to his waist, and the old man looked like he started to panic. The terrible darkness and the smell of the water full of fish made me dizzy. The adrenaline I had made me punch and kick the window. Nothing was working, and the water was almost up to my neck. The deeper I went, the less likely I was to swim to the surface on a single breath. You're hitting for nothing. The pressure is too great to break the window. I snapped at him, pouring out my anger, but the driver seemed to have changed his mind. Wait for it to fill with water and then crank the window down. I felt for the crank with my hand, and sure enough, it was there. I braced myself and started turning it. The water was rushing into the car, and I took a last breath and then pushed myself to the surface. The black and cold abyss engulfed me. I was ascending as fast as I could, but I could feel my lungs tightening and the air running out. I was praying to whatever God there is to give me a little more air for the way up. I could already see the lights of the dock as if through a fog. My eyes were freezing in the cold water, but I refused to close them. The last air bubbles rose up with a faint sound, and my lungs were compressing like a pressurized soda can. A little more, and I blew all the air out, coming to the surface. There were already ambulances on the shore, and a boat was on the lake with firefighters diving in the water. They pulled me to the shore. I was anxiously waiting to see if the driver made it until a cop came up to me. He said, "What brand was the car? How did you escape?" I told him the make of the car and then asked him about driver. The police said, "This car has electric front seat windows." Darkness had already begun to cloak the countryside as I settled onto the last bus. My phone was dying, so with what little charge I had, I called my friend Mike to let him know how long I'd be. It was his place I was staying at, and we'd arranged to meet at the stop near his house. As the bus trundled along a narrow, winding roads, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My unease intensified when I noticed a peculiar man seated across the aisle. His eyes were fixed on me. I tried to distract myself on my phone, but that lasted all of 10 seconds before the battery completely drained. Still, I kept on pretending to swipe, hoping he'd lose interest. However, as the bus rattled on, he persisted, occasionally trying to strike up a conversation. Each time I offered polite but brief responses, hoping he'd get the hint. But his invasive persistence only heightened my discomfort. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to disembark a few stops earlier than planned. There's a dirt path that cuts through an abandoned farm with the stop I needed on the other end. The bus pretty much just circles through the town and around the farm at this point before escaping back to the city, so I wasn't really going to lose any time. The cold wind had swept through the deserted farmlands as I started my trek toward Mike's house. I had been here before, but the moonless night made everything unfamiliar. I was pretty sure it was just a straight path, but I wasn't even sure I was on a path anymore. I had no idea whether it was dirt or grass under my feet. As the minutes grew, my confidence waned, and a chilling sense of isolation set in. I felt a presence lingering in the shadows, haunting every step I took. Every rustle of the crops, every whisper of the wind, seemed like an ominous warning. My heart wouldn't relent. Its pounding echoed through the fields, matching the rapid rhythm of my footsteps. I kept telling myself I'm just being paranoid. Taking a moment to prove it, I stopped dead in my tracks, listening out for someone else's footsteps. But of course, there were none. Relieved, I gave a soft chuckle, and when I felt it was safe, a little laugh slipped out. That relief vanished quick when I heard somebody laugh back. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where 1 minute you're worried about how fast your heart's beating, and in an instant it stops beating and drops down into your stomach. Well, that's where I was, torn between fight and flight. I tried to remain as still as possible, thinking that if I couldn't see anything, then whoever was there couldn't see me. It seemed to work for what felt like an eternity, but then the scratching started. 3 slow strikes, and then poof, a flame emerged from his lighter. My heart must have been in my pelvis at this point, and I realized who the mysterious figure was. Lighting a cigarette that pointed straight forward out of a sinister smile, it was the man from the bus. It suddenly dawned on me that he was close enough that when the lighter went off, he would have known my exact position, and probably did since we left the bus. I started to inch back. He started to inch forward. My fight-or-flight instinct began to kick in, and I knew there was only one thing I could realistically do. As soon as he took another drag of his cigarette, I hoped that the light from it would obscure his vision. Even just a little was better than nothing. I took the opportunity and I ran. I didn't look back, but I knew he was following me. I couldn't hear his footsteps, but it felt like a Michael Myers moment where no matter how fast I ran, he was going to catch up to me. In my haste, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated farmhouse that seemed to have been abandoned for years. It was only a small building with a door that was so worn around the edges that it swung effortlessly on a rusted hinge. I thought briefly about going in and trying to hide until I heard someone approaching fast. There was no time. I couldn't run without being seen, and there was no way I was going to trap myself in there. So again, I tried to buy a second of time. I slammed the door of the building and darted around the corner, hoping he'd be distracted enough to go inside while I made a quick getaway. It didn't work. His footsteps didn't go towards the door. They just got louder and louder as he got closer to my position. Panic set in. There was no way to run and nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. I pulled out my phone, hoping to use it as a weapon, and started to build my courage up, tapping the phone hard against my forehead to try and egg myself on. He was close, just around the corner. I had to get the edge over him. I emerged, jumping around the corner with my right arm held back, ready to implant the plastic into his skull. It was Mike. I tell you, as much as my heart kept sinking that night like I'd never felt before, I'd never felt it rise like it did when I saw Mike. My emotion got the better of me, and I burst into tears as I put my head on his chest, wrapping my arms around him. He had waited at the bus stop, but when I didn't get off, he asked the driver if he'd seen me. The driver told him I'd got off a few steps back, and apparently the weird guy got off right after me. Realization washed over me like a wave. The man had targeted me from the moment I boarded the bus, and he followed me into the dark farmlands, lurking in the shadows with sinister intentions. We went straight back to Mike's house after that, with both of us looking out to make sure we weren't followed. I didn't sleep that night and thought about making a police report, but there wasn't really much to report. Still, it gives me the creeps just knowing that guy's out there somewhere, probably waiting in the dark for some other poor unsuspecting soul to get off the bus.